Vampire adherents to the path of Lilith, otherwise known as the Lilin, Lilitu, or Bahari, revere the progenitor vampire as primal femininity. They believe Lilith is the first usurped vampire, the mother who births the Vitae, and that all kindred are her children. Stagnant patriarchal vampire society perpetuates the lie of Caine as progenitor. The Bahari seek enlightenment through pain and conflict, turning this masochistic urge into the strength to endure and overcome. As Lilith rebelled against God's commands and fought against her curse, her followers defeat the weaknesses and curses upon them to become something else. Some Bahari lead other kindred to enlightenment. Others become perfected predators. Bahari deprecate compassion in favor for fleshy pleasure, transient love, and strict parenthood over lesser kindred. As a Bahari, you fulfill the role of torturer, student, teacher, or lover to other kindred. All evidence you have seen points to Lilith as the first usurped vampire. Or perhaps you secretly adhere to the Church of Caine and gnaw at the Bahari from inside out. Greetings, Kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome back to our World of Darkness, and the first of rehashing some older videos. The older stuff that I did was a lot worse in quality, and I'm not saying that what I do now is amazing or anything like that, but sound quality sucked, lighting was just god awful. Not that, like, again, that it's any like that much better now, but I do feel that given my experience in making stuff and also my experience in playing Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition, that I might be able to give a higher insight on the way that these lore sheets work. So today we are going to start at the first lore sheet that's inside the core book for Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition, the Bahari. The Bahari are followers of Lilith. They were once a secret sect within the Sabbat, but Sabbat being a very patriarchal society, putting Caine above all else, they were there to learn. And that's pretty much that. They used the rituals to help flesh out their own practices. But again, for the most part, they were just there studying the other kindred. In the modern nights, in what we have for 5th edition, the Bahari can just pop up anywhere due to the fact that the Sabbat, for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, have disbanded in their ways of practice. So, this lore sheet allows you to have insight into the cult of Lilith, into the Bahari themselves. You don't necessarily have to be part of the cult to have this lore sheet, but you do have to be ingrained into them in some fashion. Now, that being said, I do want to put a little bit of more emphasis into things that this says. This lore sheet specifically says that you may very well be a member of that cult and therefore are following the path of Lilith. This is the first indication in V5 of a path of enlightenment outside of standard humanity. And where, when you do have to follow humanity and maintain that track and utilize the tenets of your chronicle to keep your humanity where it should be for survival, that does not mean that your independent convictions can't be all your own and wrap around the convictions that would be for the Lilitu. In this case, I suggest a few different options. You could pick up one of the various other tomes of information for World of Darkness that is going to have information on the Path of Lilith. The various other editions, Sabbat guides, and such, are going to allow you to find ethics of the faith for playing a Bahari. However, there are two prime examples of books that I personally would go to when trying to build a 5th edition character for Lilith. The first one is not a 5th edition book, but Revelations of the Dark Mother. Revelations of the Dark Mother is effectively the same thing as the Book of Nod, but instead of for Nodist scholars, it's for the Bahari. This book came out around the exact same time. It has some beautiful art, and it's set up very much like a biblical edition. So this is something that would be very good if you are playing a Bahari. Searching online is probably going to be a lot of fun for this. If I can find one, I will put a link in the description where you might be able to find a copy of this. It's a great read. It's a lot of fun. The other thing that is technically 5th edition is this book right here. The Black Hand playing the Sabbat. In the Black Hand playing the Sabbat, they do have a section on the Path of Lilith. And it's very well put out. But the thing that I most encourage people to take into consideration is what they have down for example for path convictions. And that is, follow Lilith's example in all things. Never give up your freedom. Pain is the greatest teacher. Rules are meant to be broken, and never fear the truth. There are other things in here, such as the various ways the priesthood acts, some merits and flaws, compulsions for the path, and all that are in here. And it is just, it's a wealth of information. It's not an official book, but you can find it on the Storyteller's Vault. And it was written by the same people who wrote the actual Sabbat book that is accepted lore in V5. So, like I said, it's just a great addition to your library if you're trying to flesh out characters that have more of a Sabbat leaning in your VTM game. On that, let's go ahead and take a look at what the Bahari lore sheet can give you for your character in Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition. Dangerous reputation. Bahari intimidate vampires not of their order. Vampire believers in the Cainite mythos feel uncomfortable in your presence. Once per story, you may add 2 dice to intimidation pools in tests against Caine worshippers, assuming they know of your allegiance. So, this one is outright basic. If you are a known Bahari, which is an interesting way of doing this, I would actually say that you would be able to insinuate without incriminating yourself, depending on what the political views in your city are. If you run into somebody who is like, oh, Caine this and Caine that, regardless of whether or not they are a member of the Church of Caine or a practicing member of the Sabbat, there's a lot of vampires out there within the Camarilla and the Anarchs who still see Caine as the father. They still see Caine as the first kindred who was fighting for freedom, or however you want to look at it and justify it. It's the Lucifer story all over again. It's betrayal for freedom. You could also see it as the Osiris and Set story. Like there's so many different ways of looking at the Cain and Abel story, the Cain story in general. But those vampires who have any kind of reverence to that mythos of Cainite mythology, most of the time they're not too quiet about it. And when they come at you for any reason whatsoever, you have the ability to utilize the Bahari essence, exactly who you are, the thing that makes other vampires uncomfortable, and add 2 traits to intimidation rolls. That's pretty useful if you're trying to outright avoid a conflict, um, or try to make the conflict more social than physical. Ritual scarification. You know pain leads to enlightenment. Specifically, the Lilith preach that bringing one's physical shell to the extremes of sensation grants greater insight. Once per session, you may scar yourself with 1 point of aggravated damage to recover a level of willpower damage, superficial or aggravated. Ritual scarification is an interesting practice because there are cultures and religions that do have this type of practice. I think one of the better fictional examples of this is actually in the old X-Men franchise from Fox, where they introduced Nightcrawler, and they showed that he had these almost tribal tattoo-looking scars all over his body that identified the angels, and that he gave himself those every time he sinned. The idea of being able to grant yourself an aggravated damage to increase your willpower, to mend the damage, either superficial or aggravated to your willpower, is incredibly Bahari. For me to say it like that, it's because the Bahari are all about free will. Damn the physical consequences, and just being able to swap those things. I will take a physical aggravated damage to attain some of my own personal will back. Is something that I think you would see in this path of enlightenment. Sacrifice the children. The Bahari believe both in siring childer and sacrifice. Faithful Bahari know the ultimate sacrifice is the murder of their own child. If you diablerize your child, you gain 3 extra dice in your humanity plus blood potency dice pool to absorb disciplines. This is actually a pretty dark subject matter. The idea that you would spend time teaching, grooming, and perfecting a child. It needs to be somebody that you truly do care about in a way, but also the idea is not being bound by your emotional shackles. So, prepping a child just for diablerie so that you have a better chance of gaining more disciplines for self-improvement. There's a lot about the Bahari, about the path of Lilith, that coincides with the path of metamorphosis. You truly are trying to become something greater than yourself. And there are ways of handling this specific advantage for this Loresheet that come to mind. First off, there's going to be people who are like, oh yeah, I'll keep a child NPC on the back burner so I can diablerize whenever I want to. But what if this was done with other players? Like, and I'm not saying that people should run around diablerizing other players constantly to boost their betterment or anything like that. But this is something that could lead to an incredible, what some people would see as a betrayal. If you do decide that you're going to play a Bahari and you're going to take the 3-point background for this lore sheet, sacrifice the child, you need to be open from the get-go with the other player if you choose to have an in-game child that's another player. This isn't something to spring up on someone, and it could lead to a whole dynamic of a storyline that blooms into one of grand betrayal and revelation. The womb's blood. Bahari consider fertility and sex sources of strength, with some factions placing special prominence on blood or vitae taken from the womb. Once per story, after drinking blood from the uterus, you receive an additional 2 dots in either stamina or resolve, thus increasing health or willpower by 2 until the dawn. The amount of pure sexuality within the Bahari is breathtaking to me. And I understand that this might go on some people's lines in veils, the idea of drinking blood from the uterus. But you are talking about bringing in something that is a heftier, cultish feel when it comes to bringing in anything to do with Lilith into your games. Make sure, as a group, you sit down and discuss lines and veils. I am a 100% supporter of the storyteller should sit down with the players individually and discuss lines and veils. At which point, the storyteller should sit down with everybody, and without discussing who turned in what when it comes to those examples, discussing what those are to everybody and what those mean, because this could very well be something that falls under somebody's lines and veils. Just some people might be uncomfortable with this. However, I think that it really shows the type of detachment that you get from being Kindred and not being on standard road of Euthanatos. This is something that really steps out into its own thing, and whether you whether or not you describe it as disgusting or beautiful is 100% going to be on the way that the storyteller decides to describe it, and also in which ways the players decide to take it in. First cursed. Lilith's worshippers maintain that she was the first living being, cursed by God, before Adam and Eve or Caine. The Bahari strive to emulate Lilith's curse, and in so doing, find their Cainite weaknesses lessened. You retain your clan's bane, but you can now walk in the first hours of daylight and the final hour of dusk. You can also engage in intercourse without rousing the blood. However, you radiate danger, the equivalent of the obvious predator flaw. All social tests to ostracize or slander you have their difficulty reduced by 1. Finally, any vampire assessing you with auspex immediately suffers migraine-like headaches. Their resolve and willpower drop by half your resolve, rounded up for 1 scene. First Cursed is one of those things that really should be built up. You are able to start with any point on a lore sheet. There's no direct order. The dots associated are cost. If you are buying a character at character creation, if you decide to spend 5 points on your lore sheet in the Bahari, you could very well start with First Cursed, in which case the hour before sunset and the hour before dawn, you can walk around in the sun and interact with people. However, you do seem more predatorial. You do seem more intimidating to people. And I just got to point out, I really love the fact that if anybody tries to use Auspex on you in any capacity, like using it for like scrying the soul or something, they end up getting horrific migraines, and they end up having their resolve and willpower drop down by half of your resolve. That's fun. But this really does seem to be something that would be wonderful for story fodder. This is something where your practices have increased to the point where you are now able to overcome some of the curses of Caine. And I think it's a very interesting way of doing things. Um, and this pointage, this first cursed thing, really does make the differences between the Bahari and other kindred quite evident. If you are interested in playing a Bahari, this lore sheet is a wonderful starting point in it. Playing a completely Bahari game, or just being that secret worshipper of Lilith within an Anarch coterie, or within the halls of the Camarilla salons. This can lead to some very interesting, fun, and personal roleplay, but it doesn't stop here. I highly recommend checking out the information on the Bahari and the Cult of Lilith in Cult of the Blood Gods, where not only is there a more drawn out description and plentiful knowledge to be able to flesh out a character, but there's also blood sorcery rituals that are more common within the Bahari than within, say, the Tremere or the Banu Hakim. The idea also of being able to expound on the way that Lilith has affected your character's existence can bring out some pretty amazing roleplay opportunities. So I believe that is everything that I really need to go through over the Bahari at the moment. I hope that the quality of this video is a lot better than the original one was. If you have any questions at all about the Bahari, I will do my damnedest to try and answer them if you put them down in the comments below. If you find this to be helpful to you, please like the video, and if you know anybody else who is interested in Vampire the Masquerade and the Bahari in general, please share this video so that it has a chance of reaching a wider audience, so that our world of darkness can grow and flourish and become more of a ridiculous community than it already is. I am Voivode Maquette, and this is Our World of Darkness, and I look forward to rehashing out some of the older videos that could use a little bit of love and care. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Good evening.